The committee will come to order. We do have a quorum and we're ready for business. Welcome all those who are here. A couple of things that we're right up front we need to tell you that we'll be using a timer today. I'll try to be diligent in notifying you when you have 30 seconds left to speak. We'd really appreciate it if you'd hold your remarks down to 3 minutes or less. To that end, let me tell you just a little quick story, and that's a good friend of mine who served in the legislature years ago. His name was Herm Steger, and he did periodically on the House floor when there were very protracted debates about things, would come up with little sayings. And we dubbed them at the time Hermie's Homie Homilies. And so my favorite was when the day we were caught in a real long debate on an issue up there, he said, "Mr. Speaker, the oftener you run over a dead cat, the flatter it gets." And so if you keep that in mind, we have heard an awful lot of testimony. We may not have heard from you, but we've probably heard stories similar to those that you may have to cite. We've been lectured, we've been preached to, we've had a number of things, interesting things happened here. But please be very concise in your testimony, recognizing that we do need to get finished with this. We have 4 RSs, which are pieces of legislation waiting to be introduced that this committee has to handle, preferably before the week is over. So with that in mind, there are a lot of other important issues that this committee will be facing as we will in the legislature as a whole. So with that, we'll start right off this morning. Let me call a few folks up so that you can get on deck up here in these front chairs so that we don't waste a lot of time getting to you. First up will be Gill, Marianne McGrory, Carrie Matthews, Barbara Harrison Condon, Holly Cook, Rebecca Johnson.
Rebecca Johnson has her kids. She has to get them to school. She will be.
Okay, I'll mark that so she gets a chance. One last thing before we start, and that's that if we don't get finished up with testimony by 11:30 today, we will start up at about 3 o'clock, allowing the afternoon committees to meet before we take up. We will go from 3 to 5. This committee needs a little break this evening, so we hope you'll understand that. Please come forward. Gill, please state your name for the record.
Good morning. My name is Gill. I live in District 17, and I'm representing myself, and I'm here to urge you to vote yes on HB 2. I'm a professor of American history and want to speak to you from the perspective of a historian who specializes in both civil rights and religious history, and who hears history repeating itself. I've read the hundreds of letters that Senator Frank Church received from the constituents in 1963 and 64 on the federal civil rights bill that focused on ending racial discrimination in public accommodations and employment, the same issues that we're dealing with in HB 2. At one point, Frank Church said the letters were running 10-1 against the civil rights bill in Idaho. The huge volume of letters he received showed that Idahoans who spoke up were overwhelmingly against passing that bill. And the negative arguments sounded very similar to what we've heard over the last 3 days from people urging a no vote on HB 2. These appeals included appeals against government intrusion, fears that the liberties of businessmen to hire and fire at will would be lost, fears of frivolous lawsuits, fears that whites would have to encounter black people in private spaces, and some added a dose of religious justification about preserving God's natural order. Those letters are kind of embarrassing to read today. We've learned 50 years later that sometimes it does take a federal or state law to ensure protection of minorities, whether they be black Idahoans, Mormon Idahoans, or LGBT ones. The business community has learned that diversity is good for business and discrimination thwarts it. Frivolous lawsuits did not arise from past legislation, and old religious supports for racial separation have now been repudiated officially across Christendom. We can be proud as Idahoans that Senator Frank Church and Len Jordan, a Democrat and a Republican, as well as Representatives Compton White Jr. and Ralph Harding, ignored those negative letters and voted 100% in favor of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. They represented Idaho well. They put Idaho on the right side of history. And I hope you all here will be equally foresightful and courageous. I hope you are also listening to the youth, the students that I see every day in my classes from all faiths and backgrounds who see LGBT rights as the next unfolding of the civil rights movement and as part of the American Revolution in their lifetimes. Thank you.
Are there questions? Thank you. Marianne McGrory, followed by Carrie Matthews, Reverend Barbara Harrison Condon, Holly Cook.
Good morning, sorry.
Well, it seems like afternoon already.
I know.
And that's only because I've been up that long.
My name is Marianne McGrory. I am from Pocatello, originally from Georgia, and I'm here to ask you to add the words. I know you are all tired, but in the LGBT community, we are tired as well. I was ready to speak last night, and yesterday was the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, one of the deadliest of the Nazi-sponsored extermination camps in Europe. In March, it will be the 50th anniversary of the historic March on Selma. I am somewhat incredulous that with the history of these events and others, we are still debating, judging, and slowly doling out basic human and civil rights. I am the mother of twins who were born 15 and a half years ago here in Idaho and were identified by the doctor as male. As they grew older, it became obvious that one of my twins, my son Ben, loved what society considered girl things. He was teased by some kids in elementary school, but was able to handle it with a shrug of shoulders and a toss of his head. I was not able to handle it so easily when adults would bully him, and many times was left wondering where people get the idea it is okay for them to bully and condemn a 5-year-old boy for wearing a pink Barbie tracksuit. While shopping in a store in Pocatello, the smile capital of the world, adults followed my 11-year-old son around, calling him faggot. I want you to take a moment and visualize what I have just said. Because some strangers perceived my son to be gay, it was perfectly acceptable for them to follow him around, calling him faggot, and until Ben's friend ran and got her father, not one person did anything. After much soul-searching and counseling and a hospitalization for suicidal ideation, my son became my daughter and transitioned from Ben to Brianna. Her self-esteem has risen, and she is so much happier, and she is no longer suicidal. Since this transition, I have been both lauded and condemned for my support of my child and for equal rights for all people. By not adding the words, the state of Idaho has given a pat on the back to every student, teacher, coach, administrator, and random stranger who has called my child monstrous,
30 seconds.
Perverted, deserving of bullying, and fag. By not adding the words or even calling for a hearing, the state of Idaho has reinforced the community that LGBT are indeed second-class citizens. I'll just close with, we've heard before, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. But I would ask you to do unto others as you would have others do unto your own child. Thank you.
Are there questions? Thank you. Carrie Matthews. Reverend Barbara Harrison Condon. Let me get a couple more on deck. Holly Cook, Mitch Sylvester, Emily Wilson, Hans Jensen, and Jonathan Demchek.
Holly Cook is not here today.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee for allowing me to speak. My name is Barbara Harrison Condon. I'm a pastor in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America and speak on behalf of myself and New Day Lutheran Community in Idaho Falls, where I've served as pastor. As a woman who works in a religious setting, I know what it means to be discriminated against because of gender. There are numerous Christian denominations and other religions that do not allow women to serve in leadership positions. They base their discrimination on their interpretation of particular Bible passages. In fact, 33 of the approximately 36 branches of the Lutheran Church refuse to ordain women based on scripture passages. I've personally had people leave my congregation when I've come to serve there because they do not believe that women should be pastors. However, there are some Christian denominations and other religions who read the very same Bible but do not interpret it to say that women should not be pastors, priests, rabbis, or other church leaders. Who is right? I personally am thankful that gender discrimination is only allowed in religious settings. I can't imagine what it would be like if every job avenue was open to discrimination based on gender. When it comes to gender, as well as race, creed, and religion, lawmakers have seen fit to disallow discrimination in the secular setting, despite the fact that there have been and continue to be religious people who claim the right to discriminate in all of these areas based on their interpretation of Christian scripture. Why, when lawmakers across the country and here in Idaho have said that your religious beliefs do not allow you to discriminate based on gender, unless you work for the church, or race, or creed, or religion, no matter how you interpret the Christian scriptures? Do we continue to say that the way a person interprets their religious scriptures allows them to discriminate based on sexual orientation and gender identity? What is the difference? Either you have the right to discriminate based on your religious beliefs or not. You can't have it both ways. And what about the religious freedom of the people who attend my congregation and thousands of other congregations in various Christian denominations, who believe that all people have the civil and religious right to live without civil discrimination in the workplace and elsewhere? The current discriminatory practices in regards to sexual orientation and gender identity violate our religious beliefs. There will always be contradictory views on how to interpret religious writings.
You have 30 seconds.
Someone will always be on the losing side. Civil rights such as these should be based on civil laws. That's what our founding fathers set up our government, a separate church and state. Churches and other religious institutions are allowed to actually discriminate based on their religious beliefs. Individuals are allowed to believe that someone should or should not have civil rights based on their particular religious beliefs, but individuals do not have the right to prevent another individual from having full civil and human rights based on their own particular religious beliefs. If they did, we wouldn't have the laws preventing discrimination on gender, religion, creed, or race that we currently have. Please pass HB 2 so that all citizens of Idaho are protected under the law in these secular matters of employment, housing, and public accommodations from civil and religious discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Thank you very much. Mitch Sylvester. Emily Wilson. These are all who signed up yesterday as being out of town. They may not have been able to make it back. Hans Jensen. Jonathan Demchak. Need a handwriting expert. Bogan Lida, or something like that. Patricia Truman. Kristen Fiorentino. Probably messed that one up too. Jeannie Fishburne, Paul Leach, Donna Ewell, Patty Reno. Okay. Please state your name for the record.
My name is Patricia Truman. I live in Boise. I stand before you humbled by your position in my government, but especially because of what I believe is the strength and capacity of your 17 human hearts. I'm 66 years old. More than half of those years I lived in Idaho and felt fear because of my sexual orientation. As a single mother of two and a teacher here, I was afraid that I would lose my children and or my job if my children's dad or my employer knew that I was a lesbian. To have fear enmeshed so with my love of family and my passion for my work seemed and seems so wrong. I imagine that family and work mean very much to you, and perhaps you have experienced related fears for your own reasons. If so, then you and I are alike in that way too. So what do we do with our fear? I tried being brave. I'm paraphrasing this quote, but captures my experience. I looked fear in the face and did what I thought I could not do. I knew I'd have to hide, but I signed on for a teaching job here because I had taught for 10 years, and those 10 years gave me the gift of knowing that I was meant to teach children and that I did it well. I received this anonymous note suggesting that I resign from my teaching job because, quote, the majority of parents are quite aware that you are a lesbian, unquote. This wasn't possible because I was closeted. This note frightened me, but as I said, these days I tried my best to keep calm and carry on for the sake of my students. During my 6th year of teaching at that school, my principal ordered a reluctant coworker to check my lesson plans every morning, which was clearly harassment because that was my 16th year of teaching and there was no evidence that my lesson plans were lacking. So each morning after that, after my coworker left, I untied the knot in my stomach, gathered up my heart and mind for another day of scholarship and adventure with my beloved 12-year-olds. I did leave teaching at the end of that year. Ironically, that took being brave too. But I simply needed some respite from the fear. Idaho is too great for fear. I'm much older now. My kids are grown and I did not return to teaching. So I do have less fear, but I still work and now I rent. And of course, I'm still gay. Mr. Chairman and committee members, I still have fear because I am not protected equally under the law. If you pass this bill, if you add me, I will know that the state of Idaho will have my back. I don't know if you are fearful of me, and I don't know if you're fearful of what might happen if you pass a bill that will lead to my having the same human rights as others in Idaho. But I do know that an act of courage, facing fear, facing your fear maybe, leads to personal dignity and strength. Please be brave. Please show the strength and capacity of your hearts. Send House Bill on with a do pass yes vote. Thank you.
Are there questions? Thank you very much. Kristen Fiorentino, I guess it is. Jeannie Fishburne. Paul Leach. Donna Ewell. Patty Reno will be next. Thank you. Let me get a couple more on deck before you begin, Donna. Aidan Warrior, I probably messed that up. The last name is Boland, B-O-L-E-N. Can't. Okay. Trina Michaels. Okay, Donna, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Lurcher and members of the committee. My name is Donna Ewell. Some of you may recognize me as a lobbyist for Idaho Public Employees, but I'm not here in that capacity today. Today, I'm speaking for myself and for my very traditional Idaho family. My former husband and I were raised in Idaho. We went to Idaho public schools and Idaho universities. We married in our early 20s, like everyone did then, and we had 3 sons. We worked, paid taxes, went to church, and did all the things traditional families do. Even though we divorced when our sons were teenagers, we had joint custody and we raised them together. We are both very proud of them, all of them, even our youngest son, Joe, who is gay. For those of you who know me, it's pretty easy to guess that I'm a liberal. My parents were proud Idaho Democrats. My mom was very proud to be able to vote for President Obama. It was the last presidential election she voted in before she died. On the other hand, my former husband and his extended family are very conservative. They're all born-again Christians and staunch Republicans. And as it turns out, they're also very good people. When my son came out, he first came out to his close friends, his brothers, and me. But he was nervous about coming out to his dad. So I gave him this advice. I said, Joe, your dad loves you, and nothing is going to change that. I was really hoping I was right, because Joe would have been devastated had his dad rejected him. But of course, his dad didn't reject him. Joe's very conservative, very Christian, very Republican dad still loves him, and he has totally embraced Joe's partner as well. And you know what? His entire extended family has done the same. Last summer, my oldest son, Reggie, got remarried up at Bogus Basin. All of his relatives came from both sides of the family, and trust me, there are a lot of them. All of those relatives were totally accepting of my gay son and his partner. Reggie's new wife's family, most of whom are very conservative and very religious folks from rural Idaho, they were great as well. And it was the very first time they knew that their daughter now had a gay brother-in-law. It was just a happy occasion, and nobody cared about those things. So you might wonder why I'm talking so much about my ex's family, and I'll tell you why. It's because this is not a Republican or a Democrat issue. This is not a conservative or a liberal issue. This is simply an issue of guaranteeing, am I out of time?
You got 30 seconds.
Okay, giving equal protection under the law for my son. He doesn't expect you to marry him in a church where you don't believe gay marriage is allowed, but he does expect to be served in a restaurant when he goes in with his gay partner without being discriminated against. And so many of the arguments you've heard, I believe, are total red herrings, especially the lawsuit one, but I don't have time to explain to you why that is.
The timer just went off.
Okay, I urge you to pass House Bill 2.
Are there questions? Thank you, Donna, for being here
Thanks.
today. Aidan Warrior, I hope
Yes,
I
sir, I
got that
forgot my
right.
crate. I hope you all can see me.
Could you hold on a second while I get some more people on deck here?
No worries.
Susan Boland, Trina Michaels, Alicia Clegg, Steve, I think it's Martin. Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, committee, thank you for your time today. I'm Aidan Warrior. I live in Boise since I was born. I'm a taxidermist and business owner. I've worked since I was 14 and a half years old. I worked 3 jobs at once until about a year ago now. Now I work for myself. I own a Mustang, a pickup truck. I bought a home at age 23. I just have purchased my Harley Davidson. I'm an enrolled Native American, Jalagi Anakilkatua, Deer Clan. As a Native American, many different tribal beliefs and customs originally had esteemed placement for our transgender and gay members of our tribes. They're now missing. Being transgender from female to male, I've been judged harshly every day. My biggest critic is me. I didn't choose this. I was taught that it's never a mistake to care for someone, and I can't think of a person I regret showing kindness to. And here we are, asking you for your kindness. There's people being hurt, and we're dying. And please don't let someone hurt the people I love. I'm outing myself so that you can protect them, please. Because transgender people are notorious for getting bladder infections. This is because we're terrified to use public restrooms. Several trans men I know dehydrate themselves all day at school, work, and while running errands just so they don't have to use the public facilities. I am guilty of this myself. The locker room, I'm there to change and leave. Nobody's ever noticed me. I actually stopped using the locker room at my gym, switched gyms, paid all the startup fees, cancellation fees, didn't use the locker room for 7 months. Then once I started looking more masculine, had my surgery, and people stopped recognizing me, I then went back to the old gym, repaid more fees, and started out using the new men's locker room without complaining. All this just so the biological men wouldn't be confused or offended by my body. Again, I live in Boise, and we have the ordinance. I still went out of my way to respect the feelings of others, and again went out of my way not to be noticed. Because when I'm in the locker room, I'm so worried about the other guys looking at my body and my scars that I can't even shower. I have to drive to a friend's house all the way home, because if the other guys found out, I'd be afraid of bodily harm to myself. Just because I'm protected doesn't mean I'm flaunting my gender identity or being obvious about myself and my identity. I'm being polite, modest, thoughtful of others in the locker room. I'm being a gentleman. Have I complained? No. Transgender people are all about the safety when it comes to locker rooms and public bathrooms. I don't smoke, I rarely ever drink, no drugs. I'm addicted to one thing, and that is working. I'm a penny pincher. I wouldn't go to a religious bookstore and force someone to sell me books. I'd rather save that $20 and put it
30
towards my new
seconds,
pipes
please.
for my Harley. Please add the words sexual orientation and gender identity. Judge me for who I am, not my body, and that I may use the stall for my own privacy instead of the urinal. Not my orientation, but the quality of my work, and the fact that I'm a productive member of society. Me, I am, that is. Popeye always says, I am what I am, and that's all that I am. Thank you. I stand for questions.
Thank you. Are there questions? Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Let's see, where do we leave off? Susan Boland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been a long time since Monday at 7 o'clock. Mr. Chairman, members of this committee, my name is Susan Boland. I live here in Boise. I stand before you today a proud straight ally in support of House Bill 2 and asking you to add the words sexual orientation and gender identity to our human rights law. I come as a coworker, a neighbor, a friend, and most of all, a sister. I grew up in a small town in southeastern Idaho. Over 30 years ago, my older sister, who, out of continuing fear of retribution, has asked that I keep her name and our town confidential, lost her job and her home over the mere hint that she was a lesbian. Back then, she hadn't even come out to our family, much less to our community. She was a respected member of our local Episcopal parish, a Lamaze coach, helping hundreds of families deliver healthy babies and to begin their own healthy family. She was assistant director of a well-respected nonprofit organization that, again, she has requested remain nameless. Everyone liked her. Everyone respected her. She was marvelous at her job and unequaled in her volunteering. Yet just the hint, just the whisper that she was gay was enough for her to be summarily fired. Following her dismissal, the community in which we lived became overtly hostile to her family, that means me, and to her children. She feared for their safety every time they left the house. Seeing no way to protect herself and her children in our own hometown, she left her children with their father and moved as far away from them as she felt she needed to in order to ensure that they were no longer harassed because of her and started a new life. She ended up in Wisconsin and rebuilt a life for herself. When she knew that it was okay for her to be just who she was and that she would be judged only on her ability to contribute to her workplace and her community, and when she knew that she and her family would be safe, her children joined her. My niece graduated from the University of Wisconsin and has since used her many gifts to contribute to the economy of Maine, where her and her mother now live. Even now, 30 years later, my sister is afraid to come home. She's afraid to go out in public with her family for fear of harassment. Her son, who still lives in our hometown, rarely speaks of his mother to anyone other than trusted friends for that same reason. My family has suffered because our hometown is not safe for my sister.
You have 30 seconds remaining.
I spend most Sundays across State Street worshiping at St. Michael's Episcopal Cathedral. I know that my sister is a beloved child of God and that he mourns, along with our family, that she lives in fear in our own hometown. I miss my sister. I ask that you help my sister feel safe. Make it safe. Make it okay for her to come home. Please pass House Bill 2. Add the 4 words, no more, no less.
Are there questions? Thank you.